We cannot stream anywhere else,
Okay.
and we are streaming now. So let me start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live on the Better Policy Project channel. So my name is Alexander, and today we are having a special type of event where the GFS students, the existing GFS students and new GFS students will be presenting their policy analysis of the US economy to the mock governor, who is the sole decision making for the United States. So let me introduce our mock governor. Our mock governor is Ioannis Halikias, who has 30 years of experience at the International Monetary Fund. He also is a PhD in Yale University. He completed it under James Tobin. And so he's also a senior advisor to the Better Policy Project. So welcome, Governor. And do you have anything to add? I think you're muted.
Thank you, Alex, and hello, Salva. Thinking about, as you know, we're trying to reach a decision about our next policy move, and we need to communicate this adequate to the markets. Um, uh, we have seen a lot of conflicting signals these days. On the one hand, the inflation has been coming down, but it has been above our target, as you know, for 3 years now. Uh, at the same time, and despite our recent tightening, we see continued signs of strength in the real economy. GDP for the first quarter surprised everybody, I think, on the upside. So there are conflicting indicators, and in this light, I would very much be interested in hearing your assessment and your recommendations, both on our next move and on how to communicate it more effectively to the markets.
Thank you very much, Governor. So let me introduce our first speaker, Shalva. Shalva is a level 3 student at the Global Forecasting School and the head of Monetary Policy Department at the National Bank of Georgia. So Shalva, please welcome.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Mr. Governor. It's a pleasure to present our work. So as Doug asked me to lead this way to show how discussions with the governor can go. We have prepared some slides. I can start by sharing my screen. Okay, so first of all, thanks goes to Anahit and all the other GFS students who helped me to prepare these slides. I'll be using these slides to communicate the overall general strategy that we want to use within our updated framework, how to communicate our monetary policy intentions and risks to the market, how to see them, what we think about the balance of risks, as well as for the market to understand our reaction function. So for this, we are using this FPAS. As you know, this is very similar to the previous generation of FPAS or forecasting and policy analysis systems, but with the exception that, which is very important, like evolution, is we try to concentrate on avoiding dark corners, trying to pursue this policy of what we call this policy of least regrets. And for this reason, we're trying to use scenario-based forward guidance in a way that helps us in this journey. Unlike previous types of forward guidance, when we were simply communicating what we expect in the future, that's likely for the policy rate. Now, instead of providing like a baseline forecast for inflation and for policy rate, we are trying to follow this for like a scenario-based forward guidance that tries to serve these two purposes. One is to tell the market what we think is the balance of risks, And also, the second aim is to tell the market what is our reaction function, so that if financial markets have the information of their own, like micro level analysis, and they see economy going in one direction or the other, they know how we would react, so that they incorporate this reaction of ours into their decision making, into extending loans, saving, borrowing, and so on, so that our policy acts quicker than we actually would change our policy, our current policy rate. So that is the idea. For this reason, we have adopted this. Just to remind you, we have adopted this approach of communicating case A and case B's. So case A is essentially what is the best case for above market rate path, so that we try to tell the market what is the narrative of the currently relevant risks that we look at, so that the market should look at as well. And what is the case B is best case for below market rate path. What is the best argument for having policy rate lower than what the market currently believes, so that market also knows what is our concern on the downside, so that they observe what's going on in this direction, and they update their beliefs according to our judgment of what is the balance of risks, as well as to know how we would react if and when they understand that the economy is evolving in either case A direction or case B direction. Of course, we also have this case 6Y, which is essentially like the most frightening scenarios for us. And from time to time, these frightening scenarios can warrant policy decision that may not be in line with the case A and case B, but just trying to be an insurance against these dark corners. By definition, insurance means that we are foregoing some benefits of current GDP. For instance, if the threat is that inflation can remain high, so that we see some anchoring of expectations, this threat can warrant tighter than expected policy expected by the market, even with at the cost of current slowdown in GDP. That would be our price that we may need to pay to insure against these frightening scenarios. So that's why I would call it an insurance approach, kind of. So this is our how our case NBs would look like. And again, to summarize, two aims: to show to the market what is our understanding of balance of risks, so that whether this case A and B is asymmetric about market reference or market expectations of the policy rate, and also to tell them what's the reaction function. Of course, communicating reaction function can be very complicated, but in this case, we try to tell the market how we would react, especially in the current circumstances, when case A is the most relevant risk that they should observe, and case B is the most relevant downside risk that they should observe. So, in these current circumstances, in this state of the world, what would be our reaction to these likely deviations from the market expected path? So, but we also, as I mentioned, we need to pursue this least regrets policy, and that's why we also consider these types of scenarios where if we follow case A path for policy rate, but we find out that B is more appropriate, or vice versa, and also it can be a scenario where we follow case B path, which is lower policy rate, but we then find out that if inflation is more persistent, so that case A was more appropriate, and we end up with an anchored inflation expectation. So that's kind of a case X scenario resulting from policy error. So that's what we call this case BX scenario. So this is something that we should consider because this is essentially what risk management approach really is about. And as Mr. Governor, you have frequently emphasized, we're operating in a risk management environment. So that's why we have prepared these scenarios to base our discussion on. So this is our current case A and case B scenarios. Again, thanks to our students producing these scenarios. And within this case A and B, we have incorporated what we think is currently the most relevant risks for the economy that they can follow, deviating from the market expectations, which in this case is this gray line in the middle. And let me, instead of focusing too
So
much on this.
the market expects that we stay put for next meeting and then we ease in September, if I read
That's
your chart
correct.
correctly.
That is correct. Yes, that's the market expectation at this point. And they also expect inflation to decelerate and remain relatively low, like close to 2% target. So it seems that from market perspective, inflation expectations are anchored. But of course, that doesn't mean that there is no distribution around this baseline expectation of the market. We have risks, of course, and this is what we discuss. What is the risk on the downside? Well, I think the most important argument is that high interest rates have been high for quite some time, generating some slowdown in credit growth. That can be a drag on domestic demand going forward, and that can reduce, like maintain inflation at low levels, at levels that's consistent with 2% target. Actually, during the last 2 months, we know that inflation has actually, like month on month inflation annualized has actually been below target. So the question is, will it continue? So one argument that it will continue to be close to 2%, this month on month inflation numbers, is because of moderating the demand due to like a moderation in credit growth. Also, banks have been tightening their lending standards, which can also lead to less credit supply and therefore also lead to restrict demand that can generate these disinflationary forces. The other issue is this labor market uncertainty. Even though unemployment is still quite low at 4.1%, it's been edging up a bit, and now there are some concerns from market observers that unemployment is starting to increase. And if this leads to perceptions of uncertainty by households and companies, and they try to postpone their spending plans, this can also generate some slowdown in aggregate demand. Also, this
But
wage growth has.
unemployment is still close, I think, to your estimate of the naira, right?
Yes, it's currently close to what we consider as sustainable or level consistent with our inflation target. But the concerns are more forward-looking, that unemployment has been edging up. These job additions have slowed down, and this can, like the concern is that this can continue and generate increases in unemployment thanks to this tight monetary policy and the slowing down in credit growth that will also decelerate the economy. Wage growth has been coming down as well, coming closer to what we think is consistent with our inflation target. So that's also one argument. If unemployment stays at this level, then there can be risks that wage growth remains high. But if indeed these concerns are validated and unemployment edges up, then wage growth can still continue to decelerate, making our current stance quite tight. But on the other hand, we have this case A type of risks. One of them is inflation expectations of the households and businesses, not just of financial markets. Financial markets expectations, as I mentioned, is pretty anchored. But if you look at this sticky price inflation, which is kind of an indirect way of looking at what is the companies or firms' longer term inflation expectations. When companies set their prices, if they think that their prices may not be renegotiated for quite a while, then they would think harder about what future expected inflation is. And that's kind of implicitly incorporates already these expectations from these firms setting their prices. And if since this sticky price inflation remains high, that can be suggestive that firms still have relatively high inflation expectations. So that one may say that maybe the war against inflation is not over yet. So that's something to be vigilant about. The other thing is this household's net worth, which can generate the strength in domestic demand. Actually, one argument can be because household assets can increase significantly over last several years, thanks to these COVID stimulus measures. That can be a reason why some of the households may be paying down their debt, so that's why credit growth is decelerating. So that credit growth deceleration is not a reflection of like a slower demand, but it's actually a reflection of households having so much assets that they are able to pay off their liabilities, and at the same time even on top continue consumption. So that can be one narrative. Household assets have increased by 50 trillion US dollars since the first quarter of 2020, which is like a huge number, like about
And this,
200.
this reflects both stock prices and the house prices.
Yes, that's correct. About two-thirds is financial assets, so that the stock price is increasing, but the other part is non-financial assets like housing. House prices have also increased, and also this investment has led to this accumulation of non-financial assets. So when
Do
households
you have
have
any do you have any
yes.
other indicators that to assess whether we are in a bubble in any of these markets and how big such a bubble would be relative to past experiences
So
in terms of price equity ratios, for example, or rent to income ratios, or house price to uh,
yes,
or other.
some part of yes, that's correct. So some part of the increase in equity prices, for instance, comes from this improved earnings. Like we know this kind of a famous example of Nvidia, which has like a very high earnings, and that has generated like huge increases in its prices. But of course, that's not the whole story. The other part also comes from the nominal inflation of these prices. And again, that's really part like a reaction to these COVID stimulus measures. As you see, like a big increases been observed in 2020 and 2021 when the this we had this kind of weakness in aggregate demand, but still these equity prices, which reflects expectations of the future, and these expectations of the future already incorporated the impact of stimulus measures. That's natural to expect that this has resulted in huge increases in equity prices, notwithstanding these fundamental sides, which also has some improvements. But because of this, because we think that there's some part that comes from nominal demand and stimulus measures that can be something that resembles like aspects of a bubble that can later lead to declining in equity prices and declining in like valuation of financial assets. But at this point, with this with this environment, this level of total assets is something to be considered as pro-inflationary, because households having this much assets, they will most likely try to spend some of those, and they will continue spending until the nominal increase in their income matches their increase in household in their assets. So that's how the ratio of households' net worth as a percent of their disposable personal income normalizes to its like a long-term average, which we think is much lower than the current total assets. So that's one argument for why consumption may continue. And actually, if you look at the GDP growth numbers in like the most recent numbers for Q2, it's like close to 3% year-on-year growth. And if you look at the GDP now measures, Atlanta had estimates of the Q3, which is nowcast for Q3. The expectation is still like close to 3%, 2.8% growth, which is still very high, higher than what we would think is potential growth for the US economy. Again, being consistent with this argument. Also, is this fiscal policy implications. Fiscal policy is relatively loose in terms of budget deficit, and is expected to widen because of these all the expenses that's going to be
I
incorporated.
would say it's very loose, given that we are at full employment and we are running deficits of this
Yes,
magnitude.
yes, we could say that, and also we could expect some further deterioration because of this aging and because of this climate change, all these expenses will need to be incorporated into a budget that will lead to further acceleration in debt dynamics. And that means that if government debt is increasing, private debt has to moderate. Because that's our job to make sure that the overall nominal demand is consistent with our inflation target. If public is increasing its debt, then private sector has to reduce its debt, and that's our job to achieve by our interest rate. So that's one argument
Do
why
you see
tighter maybe.
do you see I mean, given the stance of fiscal policy, do you see risks on term premium going up, or do you have any indications of that?
That is indeed a risk. That's something we do consider. So if term premium increases so much that it generates fiscal sustainability issues, that would be essentially leading to financial crisis because of heavy dependence between the sovereign balance sheet and the financial system's balance sheet, because they financial system holds a lot of government issued debt, as well as government is essentially a guarantor of the financial sector. So that these are kind of a what is sometimes called this diabolic loop. This interdependence between sovereign and financial market is a risk, which can be especially tricky if term premium starts to increase. When government finds it more difficult to service higher interest debt, and then either it consolidates or we will see some pressures on inflation or on like risk premium of the government, which would like the later can result in financial crisis, which itself would be deflationary when deleveraging starts. But of course, that's more like a case-wise scenario that we can think of. But hopefully, at this point, this is not the major issue. The issue that we currently think more relevant is if we continue with policy kind of cuts as market expects, as shown on this slide, and this generates this perception that policy rate will go down all the way to 3%, which is what we have communicated as our neutral policy rate, and the market reappraises their expectation of the neutral policy rate and reduce their neutral policy rate estimates from 3.5% down to 3%. This can generate kind of a additional stimulus that may not be warranted. That can lead to, that can be a risk of policy error because we would be following case B type of scenario when we think inflation, the war against inflation is finally over, only to realize later that case B scenario was more appropriate because all these risks on the households' net worth leading to the strong domestic demand firms the inflation expectations being high, they materialize, and we see that this overly loose policy leading to excess demand, leading to inflation expectations unanchoring. And that can be a case X scenario, which is at this point more likely than case Y scenario for the sovereign and financial crisis. And therefore, we think that it would be proper to try to communicate to the market that we are taking these upside risks on inflation more seriously at this point so that they understand how our perception of balance of risks are. And also they understand how we would react to these upside risks of higher inflation. And that would be with higher policy rate path over the future. So it's one thing that whether we continue with market expectations in September meeting, it's totally another thing what we communicate about the future path of the policy rate. One way to tell the market that in the future we expect policy rate path to be higher than we expected before could be to postpone policy rate cut instead of on September meeting to cut it later, so that we communicate to the market that our perception of risks, as well as kind of a tolerance for these risks in one direction or the other is in a direction that warrants a tighter policy. This can help us to avoid this K6 type of scenario when we follow policy cuts when only after to realize that inflation remains relatively high and leads to credibility losses. So this is also consistent with kind of a political uncertainty, how fiscal policy will evolve for the next year. That's very uncertain, and therefore, until we have more clarity, and it's also like chances are fiscal policy will be looser than would be consistent with our inflation target, so that it would be from a risk management perspective, it would be better to err on the downside of inflation at this point relative to erring on the upside. So let me finish our presentation here to say that trying to communicate to the market that postponing the first policy rate cut can be a useful step to communicate to the market that we think that case A type of scenario is more appropriate to worry about, so that we try to push market expectations of the policy rate, the whole path of the policy rate expectations, to nudge it a bit upwards, so that we generate this slowdown in private sector demand when fiscal policy is expected to be expansionary. Thanks. And if you have questions,
Yeah,
please.
thank you, Salva. No, I very much appreciate your point. I think you're making very valid points. My concern is in terms of communication that, as you know, inflation has been coming down. It's now even lower than our previous session's assessment. Uh, so that may be tricky to communicate. Even though inflation is making more progress than we thought before, we remain tight. Another thing is that are we really a bit uh, neglecting risks towards the Y scenario? Because uh, to the extent that we're in a bubble, if we keep interest rates persistently above market expectations, is there a risk of bursting these bubbles and ending up with a very hard landing? Uh, I think we need to look at this more systematically, because we may be trending towards this risk zone. So maybe, I mean, it's a big question, but I would appreciate if you paid more attention to this uh, more symmetric type of risk.
Definitely. So we will pay attention to these case-wise scenarios. One thing that we think that K6 is more appropriate to focus on relative to case Y was because of this nominal GDP increase. Real GDP plus inflation has been relatively high, both because real GDP has been increasing faster than we think is its potential, as well as nominal prices have been increasing faster than that's consistent with our inflation target. That is a bit of a kind of a help for the fiscal sustainability issues, because it deflates the existing nominal debt. That's why the fiscal kind of sustainability issues is not as kind of a big worry as inflation remaining high. Of course, if inflation remains high, then that's kind of a flip side of that is that fiscal sustainability issues may not be as worrisome as we thought before. But of course, that would be at the cost of us not following with our mandate, and that's at this point is something to tell the market that we take seriously into account. But of course, we take this comment. Of course, this is a valid point, and we will also continue to observe how much increases in term premia will be an issue, and if fiscal sustainability issues or case Y type scenarios, even with financial sector having this bubble bursting or credit deleveraging, that can also be a case Y scenario. So these are something, for instance, credit lending standards tightening that can be too much, lead to deleveraging, can lead to case Y type of scenario. So we will continue monitoring this and we will update you.
So thank you
as
very much, Salvatore. This has been very useful. Unfortunately, I need to run to another meeting, but this is very well appreciated. Very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much, Alva. So in a minute, we'll start our next presentation.
Alex, just give me a second. I think there's a knock at my door. Just a second. Make sure
Yes,
nobody-
let me know once you're available.
Yes, thanks, Alex.
Okay, let's start.
We can resume. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, and we'll start another presentation. But firstly, let me introduce our mock governor, Ioannis Halikas. Ioannis, who has 30 years of experience in the International Monetary Fund. He obtained a PhD at Yale University under James Tobin, and he's also a senior advisor at the Better Policy Project. So, Governor, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thanks, Alex, and hello, Leah. Looking forward, as always, to your analysis and your views. Let me give you my initial thinking and given recent developments since our last FOMC meeting. Inflation has been coming down, in fact, faster than we thought. Core inflation, which is our target, is now on its way to our 2% target. As you know, there are lags in monetary policy. And the question is, are we overemphasizing? And since our policy rates remain above market expectations at this point, is there any risk that we may overshoot in our inflation and have it go down? We want, as you know, we're aiming for a soft landing towards our medium-term target. So that's something that has been on my mind recently. But I would welcome your views, how you see the balance of risks, and how should we be responding.
Thank you very much, Governor. So let me introduce our next speaker, Leah. Leah, who is a level 1 student at the Global Forecasting School and also a macroeconomist at the Central Bank of Armenia. So please, Leah, welcome.
So thanks, Alexion, and thanks, Mr. Governor, for your views. Let me share my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, very well. Thanks. See a nice building from the outside.
So, hello everyone again. I am Leah. So I'm starting my presentation, and first of all, I want to say that you know that for an effective central bank communication, that effective central bank communication must contain three main components, which are: where is the economy now, what are the underlying forces, and what needs to be done with policy instruments to achieve our basic policy objectives. So that's why today I will try to answer to these three questions. First, let's understand the current state of the economy and what are the key uncertainties related to the underlying economic conditions, as well as what are the main risks that are relevant for monetary policy looking forward. So I can say that by looking at the economy, several narratives emerge, and after a slight slowdown in 2024 first quarter, GDP growth rebounded again in second quarter, remaining well above the estimates of long-run sustainable GDP growth. Growth continues to be fueled by strong consumption, particularly services consumption, and this indicates that the economy is still operating under excess demand conditions, despite the tight policy stance of Fed, and there are risks for inflation to accelerate given the strong demand conditions. And also recent analysis highlight that the growth in service consumption is the main driver of total consumption recently, which reflects a post-pandemic shift back to activities such as dining out, travel, and in-person entertainment, or in other words, after pandemic, people's behavior changed. Additionally, the increase in durable goods spending suggests consumer confidence in the economy, again, despite the tight policy stance. So what might be fueling strong consumption given Fed's interest rate hikes since 2022? One answer might be that household net worth increased significantly after the COVID pandemic in both financial and non-financial assets, which is driving the confidence in households, and they keep their consumption levels despite the interest rate. Comparing net worth from 2020 first quarter to 2023 fourth quarter, it has risen by $50 billion, which is pretty big number, and it's more than double the size of GDP in US. When we look at the asset prices also simultaneously, here we can notice that S&P 500, which is equity price, has doubled. It's almost doubled, and we can see 160% growth, which is again fueling net worth. Another reason why consumption is still strong might be the uncertainties regarding the neutral interest rate, which might be higher than what Fed is thinking. In other words, monetary policy might not be as restrictive as it seems. So it could be the case that asset prices reflect strong fundamentals in the economy and higher productivity growth related maybe to AI or other things, and which also might be also driving the neutral interest rate higher. So on the other hand, there are signs that consumption growth will cool down shortly. So if you look at the excess savings accumulated after the pandemic, which is here in the left-hand side, they are almost depleted, and consumers might finally feel the tight policy stance and tight lending conditions of commercial banks, which will quickly weigh on economic activity in the near future, providing more confidence to the Fed finally for starting the easing cycle. Also, there are big uncertainties. Let's say uncertainties.
Sorry to interrupt. Just on your. I'm also puzzled a bit by the strength of the economy on the real side, despite our tightening recently. Would we be underestimating supply factors here? Because of course this would have very different policy implications for us. Could it be in fact that, as you said, we are underestimating productivity growth, potential may be higher, so the strength that we are seeing may not at least only reflect demand side factors. Have you factored this in your assessment?
Yes, I think so. I think there are two sides of risks that maybe I think that there can be two sides of risks in overall in all economy. So here, yes, if we look at the excess savings, we can see that it's already like depleted, but also it can be underestimated because I will show further that in other economic indicators we have still tight stance of economy. We have still at a hot economy, that in other indicators are still showing hot economy. So I don't know, did I get? Yes. For example, if we look at the labor market, there are some uncertainties in the labor market. So I just want to start from the surveys. Let's examine the payroll and household surveys on employment. So you can see here that there is a noticeable divergence between these two surveys, and the payroll survey shows a significant job increases, such as nearly 2 million since 2023. And this highlights a tight labor market and persisting demand for labor. But in contrast, the household survey indicates a more modest increase of, and it's 200,000 increase compared to last year. And even it's decreased starting from the January. And this suggesting a cooling labor market and weakening inflation and pressures from the labor market. And these uncertainties continue in the labor market in other indicators too. So as I mentioned, uncertainties also remain about the labor market conditions. So while unemployment rate increased slightly recently, other indicators like how many vacant jobs are available per unemployed person still suggest a relatively hot labor market and inability of businesses to fill the vacant positions. Anyway, the recent data on unemployment and inflation indicates that indeed some cool down is in process if we think about case A and case B scenarios in context of uncertainties related to underlying economic conditions. So I think they are easy to motivate given the slides that I already presented at this moment. So in case A, economy continues to remain strong, fueled by consumption and thanks to improved balance sheet of households, while the labor market remains tight due to strong employed growth, indicating a robust job market that can continue to create further inflationary pressures through higher wages. And given this scenario, the Federal Reserve might keep the Fed funds rate in the same level for a longer period of time, rather than starting to cut it this year as the markets priced in. And in case this scenario refers to the uncertainties about the underlying economic conditions that are present when you look at the broader economy and also the labor market. And in contrast to the still strong GDP growth and elevated consumption levels that we noticed in the economy. If you look at the labor market, there are signs that the labor market is cooling down. So if you look at the unemployment rate, it's around 4.1%, and it's increased from 3.5 or 3.6% from the previous year to around 4.1% recently. And the wage growth gradually starts to decline. So one might notice that the economy is not as strong as the household net wealth or consumption levels will suggest. And if you look at the labor market, there are signs that actually the economy is cooling down, and maybe the neutral rate in the economy is not as high as some of the measures suggest. And indeed, maybe monetary policy was quite restrictive recently, which is also affecting the economy to cool down. So if that's the case, if this is
just to understand a bit, so there is this tension there, right? That we have on the one hand relatively strong real growth, unemployment is close to Nairo. There are, as you say, some signs of cooling, but not really very strong. So the economy seems to remain strong on the real side, but at the same time, you have a steady decline in inflation, which has been even faster than we thought. How do we reconcile these two? What do they tell us about demand and supply factors in the economy?
I think that sorry, can you say again your question? I didn't get that.
Yes, that on the one hand, we have signs that the real economy remains pretty strong, right? We have even an acceleration, as you said, based on our colleagues at the Atlanta Fed now casting second quarter GDP. Unemployment is at its Nairo level, so there is no slack in the economy. So these are signs of a strong economy. But at the same time, inflation has been coming down, right? Steadily and faster than we thought before.
Yes, I think
wouldn't this suggest that the main action is on the supply side rather than on the demand side? So could you be faced with more, I mean, as you said, productivity growth that we're not counting on, or other supply side factors?
I think that we need to take into account these two-side risks that in our new framework, as we have a risk management approach. So I think the question here is which type of policy error might be worse for the Fed. And also this is the essence of least regrets policy. So the policy error when Fed starts to ease policy stance quickly, and then it happens that underlying economic conditions and also inflationary pressures are still there. Neutral rate is higher and inflation starts to reverse and increase. And Fed understands that the problem of inflation hasn't been solved yet, and starts to reverse the policy by increasing interest rates again. Or the policy error where the Fed keeps interest rates higher for longer, and then it happens that the economy starts to go into recession very quickly, and Fed realizes that a bit late, and then starts to reduce quickly the interest rate. So these two possible errors summarize I think the two regrets that Fed might experience, and the policymakers should understand which type of error for them is more costly and better to avoid. But from risk management and from least regrets perspectives, I think given the initial conditions of the economy, and the fact that the inflation has been above the target for the last 2 years, the first type of error will be more costly as in the situation inflation expectations may adjust upward, making the trade-offs for stabilizing inflation and output, I think, will be more costly for the Fed.
Okay, but I'm still a bit doubtful about this. A type of policy error of keeping interest rates too high for too long. Do you think your downside scenario or your low inflation scenario is only a risk for recession? Are there other potential risks if we don't ease in line with market expectations? Could there be financial stability risks? Could there be risks of this type that we should factor in?
Oh, it's not only a recession risk, but if there is a case B type of award, this means that the Fed needs to reduce the key policy rate slightly more aggressively than what is currently priced in markets in order to bring the economy back to the equilibrium and not to create a bigger and unnecessary recession for achieving the price stability objectives.
How would price stability be affected, do you think, if we keep interest rates high or too high, let's say?
If interest rates high, so
yes, if we are not going to ease in line with market expectations, how would uh, financial stability risks manifest themselves? What would be the main things to look out for there?
Interest rates will be higher for a long time than what market expects, and this will harm the credibility, and also this will affect on some indicators like unemployment rate, and this will affect to the price stability and sorry, to the financial stability.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I mean, if we keep interest rates high, right? Would we have an impact on bank, for example, if you look at banks, would that have an impact on banks' balance sheets and banks' net worth? Are the channels there that we should be concerned about? Remember, banks hold a lot of fixed income, fixed rate paper on their balance sheets. After all, to boost their, to satisfy the liquidity requirements, right? They hold a lot of government bonds, etc. Would that affect their financial position if interest rates remain high?
Yes, I think so. That if we, yes, I think that it, of course, it will also affect banks. So, but
yeah, I mean, banks will suffer capital losses, right, if interest rates remain too high.
Yes,
on their portfolio.
Yes, of course, it will also have effect to the bank's portfolios.
Yeah. Please go on. No, this was very useful.
Yes. So I can now speak about the market expectations. And if you look at the market expectations, they have also priced in some cool down in the economy recently, as the market expectations for Fed funds rate shifted slightly downward after the June decision. But what is interesting also, interestingly, if you look at the market expectations and FOMC's projections of future policy rate, you can notice that over the short term, markets are more optimistic in terms of rate cuts than the Fed. However, over the medium term, markets expect higher policy rate compared to Fed, which is also illustrating the different views regarding the neutral interest rate in the economy. There is also something that we noticed. We also noticed that the Fed revised its long-run assessment of Fed funds rate upward from the March projection of 2.6 percent to 2.8 in June. Additionally, for 2024, they have set a range for the Fed funds rate from 4.9 to 5.4%. So here the question, what's the reason behind this? I think the upward revision of the long-run Fed funds rate to 2.8% is mainly connected to the uncertainties around the neutral rates, and Fed only gradually realizing that there are risks of higher neutral rates, while the markets are more flexible in terms of adjusting their expectations. But the most important part of this story is the disagreement among FOMC participants, and even one member's projection of a 3.8% rate highlights the uncertainty in the markets. And if we go back on 2023 June, only one FOMC participant believed that the long run rate is high, but now there are 4 people that are believing that long run rate is higher. So now let's move from discussing the current economic conditions to focusing on risks around the outlook. So as you know, there is a significant uncertainty related to the upcoming US elections. So Biden announced that he will not run for president again, but he is supporting his vice president Kamala Harris. In her agenda, she supports increasing the corporate tax rate and ensuring that the wealthiest Americans pay a fair share of taxes. So she has also been a proponent of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour, aiming to improve the living standards of low-income workers. So recently, you can see that it's $7.25 per hour. So we're talking about doubling of minimum wage, which can have a significant impact on the labor market by shifting the distribution of wages to the right and fueling the some inflationary pressures further for the economy. A recent survey to employment also shows that around 32% of all employees earn under $15 an hour. So the change of minimum wage really will be affecting for a big part of employment. And also Trump has even more inflationary items on his agenda, and the environment in the US could be highly inflationary if he's elected. One issue concerns import tariffs. Currently, you know that US has imposed tariffs on imports from China, and particularly on electric cars. And Trump has promised to double these tariffs if he's elected. Additionally, his agenda includes migration and taxation policies that also could further drive inflation in the US. As you know, recent years, the US experienced a significant inflow of migrants, which somewhat helped to alleviate the inflationary pressures from labor market by increased supply of labor. And you know that Trump's policy is not so friendly with foreign migrants, which will put some pressure on a still overheated labor market. And additionally, 3.4 trillion USD tax cuts initiated by Trump in 2017 are going to expire in 2025, and there is big uncertainty if these tax cuts implied by a Tax Cuts and Job Act in 2017 will be made permanent or not. So, you know, if that's the case, fiscal policy might be more expansionary than what is currently projected by CBO, and not talking about the unsustainable debt path that may emerge because of expansionary policy. These factors contribute to considerable uncertainties about post-election inflation, both in US and also globally, you know, which we should consider.
I mean, there is uncertainty about the policy mix, but the way that you present it and the way that I also understand it, I think, and the baseline should be that that fiscal is going to remain expansionary no matter what the outcome of the election is. Maybe expansionary on the expenditure side if the Democrats are elected, and expansionary on the tax side if the Republicans are elected. So
Yes,
as far as we are concerned, I don't think there's much uncertainty. I think we'll be faced with high deficits either way, right? Is that
yes.
your bottom line also?
Yes, it's I mean I think so, because these two have in their agendas inflationary things, let's say, and also what is
It
interesting.
doesn't make our job any easier, in other words.
Yes. And also what is interesting that Doug also mentioned, so inflation, for example, if inflation were to rise around some point, it would likely cause businesses to raise prices more quickly and workers to demand higher wages, like the 1970s inflationary period with today's fast information, because today's fast information spread, through the social media, inflation expectations could adjust even faster, and this can even make this situation more volatile and risky. So let's briefly speak about my scenarios. So I illustrated these scenarios based on my assumptions about the US economy and based on uncertainties regarding the underlying economic conditions. And as you saw, after examining various data points, and I examined also historical narratives, I created this analysis using Excel by inputting numbers without using a formal model. I thoroughly looked at all the US economy's data, examined the historical context. So the interplay between labor market dynamics, household net worth, and the initial interest rate will, I think, significantly influence the Federal Reserve's policy decision and the broader economic trajectory. So I think these lines summarize everything that I presented before. No doubt that there is a very big uncertainty currently, and by uncertainty I don't mean only uncertainty about the future economic developments, like I mentioned some related to elections in US, but also uncertainty around the current underlying economic conditions. So on one hand, some of the indicators, as I mentioned, suggest that the labor market is still strong and the economy is operating under excess demand conditions, while some of the indicators suggest, the cooling down. So I think in that sense, uncertainty is big, and it's impossible to talk about some baseline view in the situation, which also highlights the importance of Mark II framework. So in case A scenario, the unemployment rate could decline further, suggesting a hot economy, and further some inflationary pressures you can see. Then Fed needs to create a recession to bring the economy back by keeping the interest rates higher for longer. So in this hot economic environment, initially inflation is rising, but then it goes back to the target as Fed's tighter policy is going, Fed is doing some tighter policy. And in the case B, Fed is reducing the rates more quickly to bring the economy back, as also you can see that unemployment rate is continuing to rise and the inflation is decreasing. So
I'm very sorry,
yeah.
Leah,
Unfortunately, I
I
have
think
to
we
run.
are, the governor has another meeting. We are running out of time. Not sure whether it's possible to finish, or I think we just need to move on.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks very much.
Thank you.
This
Thank you.
was
It was
very
a great
interesting.
presentation, Leah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, just to be clear, the 28-minute mark is drop dead. Okay, so you have to start shutting it down at the 27-minute mark. Okay, we can't go over again. Okay, please start the next one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So next we have Rudik. Is Rudik, yeah, you're here?
Yes, hello everyone.
Okay, fantastic. Yanis, do you need more time, or can I start introducing?
No, let's start because we're
Yes,
behind.
exactly. So hello everyone once again, and let me introduce our mock governor, which is Ioannis Halikas, who has a 30-year experience at the International Monetary Fund. He has a PhD from Yale University under James Tobin. So now we'll have our next presenter will be Rudik, but let's talk to our mock governor. Do you have anything to add at this point?
No, hello, Ludik. As always, welcome very much your analysis. We're in a bit baffled right now because we see strength in the real economy on the one side, but faster than expected decline in inflation. Uh, so it's one of those tricky periods. Our the market expects us to stay put for now, but cut already in September. So what should we be doing? And how should we communicate to the market what our decision finally?
Fantastic. So let me introduce our speaker, Rudik. Rudik is a level 1 student at the Global Forecasting School and also a macroeconomist at the Monetary Policy Department of the Central Bank of Armenia. So Rudik, please welcome.
Okay, let me share my screen. So hello everyone. I will show you a couple of analyses and case scenarios. Of course, we know that there has been lots of uncertainties around US economy. Some of them diminish, about which I will talk later, but some of them continue to stay true. So here, let's have an outlook of taxonomy of shocks. For case A types of considerations, I took based on uncertainties, the strong demand continue to persist, and as there could be a case that higher neutral rates are high, the inflation expectations get finally de-anchored as the situation continues to stay the same for a little bit longer period of time. And also for case A type of considerations based on the recent projection of CBO, I took tax cut expansions after the upcoming elections. And for case B type of considerations, we should consider the, of course, tightening of the loan conditions and its consequences, the labor market uncertainties, which a little bit are getting diminished based on recent data, and also this case B type of scenarios like interconnected asset price adjustments, they make consumer and overall other agents' confidence to get normalized or even to decline. So we know the story that after the COVID, people have not normal rates of savings. After that, also they got lots of remittances, lots of easy money, but the basket was constrained, and after that, because of that, they started to use all this money, had revenge spending, which created all these excess demand conditions. And yes, we see some adjustment in the economy. However, yet on different sides like service, like shelter, and so on, we see that demand continues to persist, and the reaction of the economy to the policy rates hasn't made agents to have 100% certainty about also the neutral rates, and besides that, other long-term conditions and assumptions about neutral rates. We can assume, based on all this, that it could be the case that the neutral rates are a little bit higher, and the Fed hasn't been for all this time restrictive enough. We know that the credibility of Fed is still high, and because of that, when we see the 5-year break-even inflation, we don't see yet huge shifts. However, if this type of situation continues to hold true for a little bit longer periods of time, finally, with some lag, we can see also the change in inflation expectations and expectations about overall economy, and because of that, there can be some tensions on wages and other prices as a consequence.
Can I ask you briefly, sorry, Rudik, how are we going to read this low savings rate? Is that cause for concern, or shouldn't we also take into account the fact that household wealth has increased a lot, so their their flow of savings relative to income is low, but their stock of savings has increased by a lot, right? In terms of their holdings of financial and non-financial assets.
Uh,
Your savings rate is flow of savings as a share of income or disposable income, right?
yes.
Right. But is that so? In normal conditions, if nothing else had changed, this could be a cause of concern. But should it be concerning now, given that essentially they have reassessed their wealth position and they are saving lower? They are consuming more out of the increased stock of wealth.
I haven't thought about that deep, so it's difficult to answer now, but
Okay, maybe that's something that we could explore,
yeah.
think about. I
Right.
mean, there are no clear answers to these questions. It just, please go on. Concerns on my side. Please go on. Yeah.
Yeah, and another story could be the tax cut extensions. As we know, some people expect that it could be some scenario where after the 2024 elections, there can be tax cut extensions. And this type of extensions we have seen before also. And based on that, CBO released a new projection of how it can tax cut affect the deficit or the deficit of the US economy, and also how it can have some impact on short run for the consumption side. And this also, if holds true with all other risks, can accumulate additional risks for a higher inflationary scenario. I think that's all for case A type of risks. And for case B types of risks or scenarios, we know that the base rates for as a result of course Fed fund rates reaction, base rates increased for different lows, and because of that the interest rates became tighter for the different types of loans. And even when we see the banks tightening lending standard from this survey of senior loan officers, we see that yet the percentage of loan officers who tighten gets lower and lower. However, it's still above zero, and above zero means that the market, the banking sector still continues to tighten the condition on loans, and this gets incorporated in like different parts of the economy. For example, if we watch the debt and loan securities for like corporate businesses, and this is one part is gotten finance got from a channel of like bonds, corporate bonds, and loans from the channel of like banking sector and so on. We see that overall the leverage like decelerated recently, and this, if we like make the dichotomy of leverages to debts and loans, we can see that it mainly comes from the loan side. Yeah, the financing from debt securities like normalized to some level. However, from loan sides, as a like consequence of tightening, also started to decline, and because of that, we can see that we can have a scenario where this continues, and we see a less and less financing of businesses, and decline of purchasing power for businesses. And this can get incorporated in different things like asset prices also. And as a consequence, if these asset price adjustments continue or happen according to this scenario, it can normalize back the confidence of consumers and businesses and banking sector, or it depends on where the economy goes. If it becomes more severe, it can decrease the confidence substantially, which can create a money destruction scenario even. But for now, this, and from the labor market side, we knew that as recently the two major like BLS surveys had a huge gap between the payroll survey employment and the household survey employment. I don't have here the previous projections, but after a new release of payroll survey employment, there has been a huge decrease in the gap between two of them, because if before that one was showing more like loosening standards for labor market, and household survey was showing more the vice versa, one was showing that payroll employment was showing that the labor market is really hot, still hot, and the household survey was showing that labor market is cooling down. Now the gap between two of them became less, and from the side of payroll survey employment, meaning that this case A type of risks and uncertainties diminished towards more case B, meaning that now more data supports on the cooling down of the employment, and this creates a case B type of risks. And based on that, there are also some projections for the future. We see in case A that policy rates goes a little bit higher and stays higher for a little bit longer period of time than the market reference, because markets now expect rate cuts, even couple of them by the end of this year. But based on case A, as both the neutral rates are higher and both that expectations get de-anchored, it stays a little bit higher for longer periods, then adjusts. And for case B, of course, having into account that the purchasing power of like businesses gets diminished, and that unemployment rate, like unemployment cools down and unemployment rate goes a little bit high. Because of that, with case B scenario, we are having a little bit lower path to normalize the unemployment towards the long-term unemployment rate. And I think that's it for now.
Let me talk a bit about your scenarios, if you can bring them back just to see them better. Is your, as you know, I mean, we have to operate under uncertainty here. So we need to look at the relative likelihood of being in your case A or your case B, and also what the costs of making a mistake are, right? That if what is your analysis tell us about the likelihood of these scenarios and their relative costs?
If we talk about the relative costs, for me personally, like both case A and case B are like have the same risk, because in case A type of continuation, we can lose some credibility here, and after when this scenario holds true and we get the anchored inflation expectations, it will be really difficult to bring the inflation back to the target. And if we talk about case B, I would say that there are some risks, because like higher inflation for this longer period of time with like this increase of higher like prices for assets like houses and shelter are and also the big leverages that banks and businesses and of course households accumulated. If we compare it to the previous like recessionary periods, they are like they can be taken as a signal for the recessionary risks, and in both cases, like we have risks, but as for now, I would say that this uncertainty around like case B types of risk, whether there will be recession or no, like is really, really high. But case A type of risks are like strongly supported for longer period already. And these uncertainties become like a little bit certain through a period. Because of that, I would say that still case A type of risks hold strong for as my personal like answer.
I mean, your case A looks a bit baffling to me. Maybe it's a bit extreme. I mean, if you look at your path for the policy rate, after all, inflation has been coming down, right, steadily, and your case A suggests that we should be raising interest rates in the near term. We have been holding them constant for
Yeah, or
some
at least,
months now.
yeah. Or at least it keeps constant for a little bit longer period. Like our markets expect it gets down like with 3 cuts by the end of the 2024, and then substantially got like adjusted down in my case A, even if it's not suggesting like high increase import rate. It should just let it stay like for at least a couple of months more after 2024 at the same rate, and then decreases.
No, the way I see it, it looks like it increases in the near term, but
Yeah, a little bit increases as like
right.
because of neutral rates are higher in this type of scenario to like bring back
What is
inflation.
your concern? I'm not sure I understand why neutral. I mean, neutral rates, the way I understand them at least, is the rate that is consistent with inflation back to target, right, and stable, and the economy at full employment. So, yeah, I mean, between January and between now and whenever you reach your steady state, you are not at the neutral rate, right? The rate deviates, the actual policy rate deviates from the neutral because you are not in that position. But once you reach it, say in mid or end 27 in your scenarios, why the neutral rates would be, shouldn't the policy rates be at the neutral rate, and why should there be differences between the neutral rates across the two scenarios? It's not clear to me.
Why there is a difference between long-term rates in KSA and others?
Yeah, I mean, the way I understand the neutral rate is what rate you should have to support inflation at target and full employment. So I understand why actual policy rate would differ, of course, as you transition to the steady state, but why would the neutral policy rates, which should be the actual policy rates at the point you reach your steady state, be different?
Yeah, because if I understood the question correctly, it's because the long-term interest rates also are higher than what is incorporated in the markets now. That's why the unemployment and deflation
I
get
was talking about your case A
higher.
versus case B scenarios. Okay, this is a big question. Let's think a bit more about it. I'm just expressing a bit of a puzzle there on my side. No, I think, and given that there is this, as I understand, we have this risk management approach now. How do we communicate policy rate decisions at this point? What do you think is the suppose we want to be somewhere between case A and case B. I mean, and make our probabilistic assessments. How do we convey this to the market, do you think, since we don't have a baseline after all under F+2?
Yeah, after assessing
What should be our main message to the market at this point?
After assessing the risk, whether as of now, like there is high recessionary risks or no, and where do we have more costs, the decision should be based on the communication should be based on that, where we see more costs and how we accept the policy rate decision. I think in that way, like which is the least regrets policy for us, where we see like
Right. So we should be emphasizing least regrets.
yes, we should emphasize
Okay.
which like
Thanks.
policy rate we have like minimized the costs for the economy in the country.
Thank you. No, I think that's thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to switch to other meetings, but thank you so much for your input, Rudik.
Yes, thank you very much, Rudik. That
I
was
will and thank you for your questions. I will continue to think about these saving rates and also maybe some adjust some risks for case also, because after all, it could be that, yeah, maybe 4% long-term rate is actually a little bit severe with the current risks. So thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Just give me a break. Give me 1 minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just ask you quickly whether my internet is working well? Because I had some issues with like listening to Rudik. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes,
Can you hear-
yes, yes. Perfect. Fantastic, fantastic. We'll be starting once Yanis is back.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. We can resume whenever you are ready.
That's amazing. I am ready. So, welcome everyone after this short break. And let me first introduce to you our governor. So our governor is Yanis Halikas, who has 30 years of experience at the International Monetary Fund. He has a PhD from Yale University under James Tobin, and he's also a senior advisor at the Better Policy Project. So now we'll have a presentation by Miriam, but first, let me ask the governor, do you have anything to add at this point?
Hi, Mariam. Good to see you.
For me as
Looking
well.
forward, as always, to your analysis because we are a bit of many minds here in thinking about what to do next. We see inflation coming down, in fact, faster than we thought a few months ago. At the same time, we see persistent signs of strength in the economy. GDP growth was strong in the first quarter. It's estimated to have remained strong or even strengthened in the second quarter. Unemployment is pretty close to its Nairu. How are we going to assess the situation? Is it demand being strong? Is it supply surprising us on the upside again? And therefore, what do we need to do with rates and how to communicate any decision that we need to make very shortly.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Governor. So let me just briefly introduce our speaker, Mariam. Mariam, who is a level 2 student at the Global Forecasting School, and she's also a macroeconomist at the National Bank of Georgia. So please, Mariam, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very nice for me to be with you today before this very important and interesting meeting, because we all know that tomorrow we have FOMC meetings, and after this we will get the decision. So from my perspective, before sharing my presentation with you, that I assume that we will not see any rate cuts at this upcoming meeting. But from my perspective, the key that what kind of communication they will have. Will they convince public more that we will see rate cuts in September? And I'm just waiting from their communication if they are really seeing enough evidences for the rate cuts. Do they see this? Because we see that they are incrementally just moving into this direction. As Governor said here, that we have this low inflation, we have this high growth, which is kind of dream scenario, right, for the policymaker. And in this particular case, it's very important what we will get tomorrow. But before that, let me just provide you my analysis and what kind of risks do I see and what kind of recommendations would I give to FOMC, and also how would they, from my perspective, what would be the good type of communication which would be in line with FPAS Mark II philosophy. Do you see my screen? Because
yes, very well.
Okay.
Yes.
So first, let me just tell you very briefly, for those who may not be hearing this, I'm sure the governor is very well aware of what we are talking about. Just we are talking about here this scenario analysis approach under FPAS Mark II, which we are applying to the US economy. So why we believe as a staff member of the central bank, for example, is very important to follow such kind of framework is that it exactly helps policymakers to deal with these uncertainty-related challenges, and which is very important from current perspective is that to be in line with this least regret policy, which under this case means this minimization of losses and avoid being trapped in the dark corners. How we do this is that we follow these very structured components of analysis. First, we just analyze where's the economy now, and I'm gonna do this in a second for the US economy, and also what are the underlying forces of the economy. And third is that we have to answer to the key question from the policymaker perspectives. This is a fundamental role of the monetary policymaker. They have to answer to the question what they need to do with their policy instruments in order to reach their goal, which means for the Fed is like both, since they have this dual mandate, anchoring inflation and inflation expectations, and also at the same time just do not harm economy too much and having this economy in a shape as well. So let me start from the current analysis for the United States. Basically, I would start with what's happening at the market and what kind of expectations do we have there after this newly released data, I mean in inflation and in real GDP growth, as Governor said as well. Well, we all saw that the inflation, especially Fed's favorite measure of core PCE inflation, appeared to be much, not much, but incrementally lower than what we used to expect before that. And also this happened at the same time while we see that there is no harm to the economy. The real GDP growth is still performing really well. And even if we look at like our expectations before these growth numbers, it's better than we used to expect. So how it's reflected into the market scenario and how the market perceives this type of situation. Well, it's from my perspective, it's obvious that the market believes now the soft landing scenario rather than this hard landing scenario that we always used to communicate. Because at you remember the period of 2022 and 2023 when we characterize this type of period mostly as a policy error periods, because policymakers were kind of delayed in their policy response. responses. After this, we saw these inflationary forces, right, elevated. So after this, we used to communicate that, yes, it's impossible for the policymaker to reach inflation target over the period without harming economy too much, meaning that without generating hard landing scenario. I was always in the kind of group of people who were more, who believed more Larry Summers' view that hard landing scenario is something that Fed will have to generate. However, market has, based on the market's views, it's kind of changed, you see. We see, for example, recently, as of 25 July, compared to, for example, the beginning of the July, while we did not know this data releases, this inflation number and this real GDP growth, we see how they perceive these changes. We see that they are revising down their expectations, and they see that it's happening without generating too much unemployment, because unemployment still is below than, for example, CBO's Nauru estimate. It's 4.2 approximately. And it's also very interesting for me that we see that over the shorter term, they are revising down these expectations, and at the same time, the longer term expectations for the policy path is also declining slightly, but still. However, what we have to pay attention is there is that it's this longer term, the terminal point of the market's expectation is still between 3 and 4. It stands at 3.5. So the way higher still than what Fed communicates in its FOMC projections, for example, from June. We see there that Fed believe that 2.8% is something that is relevant for the longer term period, which means for that a real rate will be still somewhere 0.8, 1%. And if we compare to this, what market perceives, no, it's not the case. Market believes slightly differently. I see it believes that the longer term rates will be higher. However, what I see the positive is that, as I've said, there is kind of soft landing scenario from the market perspectives, and also given that they are revising down these short-term and long-term expectations for the policy path, it means that we should not maybe expect too much rising term premium, right? And this avoidance of rising term premium could be good for as well for the longer-term perspectives in terms of growth as well. And like for looking from these perspectives, it could be the sign of that, yes, inflation expectations are anchored. So what's also very important for us to look there is that given such type of developments, market definitely increased its probability that we will see the rate cut in September. And to be honest, from my perspectives as well, if we see that the inflation numbers will continue to go down, and it will happen at the same time while we see this good real economic activity, and this real economic activity will not be too accelerating these inflationary pressures, maybe we can see. But from my perspective, I still see the risks that leads me to more the direction where I would recommend Fed to be more cautious. And what I see the following. Well, as we said that this is, yes, this inflation, core PCE numbers and CPI numbers are declining, but look what's happening in the sticky underlying inflation measures. I see that
your core inflation, Mariam, is the green line, right? And the
in this particular case, I have not. In this particular case, I have not added here core inflation. What you see here, Governor, is underlying inflation. We see this sticky price inflation measure. Core sticky price inflation measures year over year and 3 months over 3 months. And I would provide you my argument why I'm showing this. I'm showing this because of the fact that I believe that we see these disinflationary processes in the United States because of flexible price disinflation and low inflation rather than a sticky price. So if we look at the, for example, CPI basket of the US economy, we will clearly see that 30% of this basket goes to the flexible basket and 70% belongs to the sticky price items. So that's why what we see that, yes, flexible price is going down. For example, these fuel oil prices, also these used car prices and new car prices, which basically led flexible prices to go up and price level shift in the United States. That was also then at the later stages translated into these sticky prices as well. But currently we exactly see the acceleration there. And that's a reflection from my perspective of this low inflation. If you look at for example, some underlying inflation measures, such as, for example, shelter inflation, which is still far above than 2%, service inflation, which is still far above than 2%. I don't know, many other items that are exactly in the sticky price basket. It shows us that no, we are not there still yet. And Fed has to do some sort of things to make in order to succeed in this process. It goes down, as you see, this year-over-year sticky prices and 3 months over 3 months, but it's more stubborn rather than, for example, flexible prices. So it's exactly what I see now is argument for me to say that Fed needs to be careful, and it's more case A type of argument under FPAS Mark II framework rather than case B type, where we would recommend policymakers to decline its policy. Now, let me exactly link these underlying inflationary measures and its real economic activity to each other. While we are saying that, yes, real economy is performing well, we have to analyze what drives this economy to be strong, right? And yes, what's happening in underlying inflation is exactly a reflection of this as well. We see that economy continues because of several factors, and the key factors among them is consumption, service consumption, exactly. Basically, I'm not maybe saying as a new thing that you have not heard before, but even in the latest VO update, we saw that policymakers and in general, we are talking frequently about these sectoral shifts. People move from to goods sector consumption to the service sector consumption. That's why we see that service sector consumption is robust in the United States. And from my perspective, it's exactly the sign of this demand-side inflationary pressure in the United States. That exactly leads underlying inflation to be stubborn because the service part is exactly incorporated into this underlying inflation basket. So this is first factor, this consumption stuff. And let me exactly just continue this line. Recently, I've published a paper with Doug Laxton, Jared Laxton, and Shalom Hatrishvili at the National Bank of Georgia, where we exactly analyze this type of development, what's happening in the United States. And the key question there is that why we don't see, for example, this recession in the United States, and what are the sources of this robust growth. And we exactly emphasize this consumption stuff. We, in our research paper, we link these forces to what's happening in the household's balance sheet. And why? Because the household's balance sheet is a good reflection of wealth's effect of consumption. I mean that we saw that household's balance sheet improved very significantly over the last decades. And this improvement was mainly driven because of this wealth accumulation process. In terms of financial wealth, what is just proved by the stock market dynamics, and in terms of non-financial wealth, which is proved from the house market dynamic there. As of the first quarter of 2024, we've seen that it still increased. Household assets increased by 53 trillion. And also these assets, financial assets, also increased by 36 trillion. And we see some sort of increase in non-financial assets as well. We don't have the data for the second quarter for the household's balance sheet, but we have the data of growth. We have the data of stock market dynamics. And for sure, the case is still there. Strong stock market drives consumption to be strong and drives through the way of this wealth effect of households' balance sheet. And now the key question is that do we see here some sort of fundamentals that drive stock market to be strong? From my perspective, we can divide two sorts of people, right? People who believe this efficient market hypothesis, and under such case, we may say that yes, these stock market prices are validated even based on this, for example, AI productivity growth, which leads neutral rates to be higher. And it's exactly, for example, longer term rates to be higher. And it's exactly incorporated into the stock market dynamics as well. It's just the reflection of this. Or we see some sort of bubble, and we will see at some point of the deceleration in stock market prices. by the way, while we used to talk a lot about this household's balance sheet previously, it could be the sign of the bedtime, because people mostly, once we are in at bad times, we are talking about the household's balance sheet, right? While we are in the good times, we are mostly focusing on how good the economy is performing and so on. From my perspective, in how I see this household's balance sheet and stock market dynamic is we are in somewhere between. Maybe we see some sort of bubble as well there, and maybe we see that this rising stock market is also reinforced and supported by these fundamental factors as well. I mean, these higher interest rates. So from my perspective, to sum up this part of my presentation, I believe that this consumption, service consumption-driven growth is generating some sort of excess demand condition in the United States. We see this positive output gap even in CBO's estimates, even though that we can somehow make some sort of correction there because we used to criticize some sort of dynamics, how they showed us this potential output over the pandemic period as well. But still, I'm using this as an argument that, yes, consumption is strong and this generates excess demand condition there, and this is reflected in underlying inflation pressure as well. Now, another point, what drives real GDP growth to be really strong. And this is really important for us to take into account because this is related to the fiscal side. And I've labeled here this slide as a political uncertainty and fiscal dominance risks. Let me tell you that if we look at for example, GDP now numbers, we will see that one of the key drivers of the growth is government spending as well, in tandem with this consumption spending. And this government spending is, yes, loosening. Government fiscal sector is loosening, meaning that it's more accommodative. But what is a key trouble for monetary policymaker at this point? If you look at for example, total deficit decomposed in the net interest outlays and primary deficit, you will see that net interest outlays are rising. So this is, I think it's a near-term concern as well, because if we see that net interest outlays are rising, it's a burden, and it can somehow, under different types of political situation, create some sort of pressures for the monetary policymaker, because we know that lowering interest rate would be helpful in this regard, right? So what I'm saying is that we don't know what will happen, but as of this point, I see some sort of risks of fiscal dominance and over the time. And I'm using this argument to reinforce my idea that it's time now to be more prudent. It's not time now to be more to keep more cautious position and not to be too fast in rate cuts. If, for example, if we look at the longer term, I think that fiscal sustainability may be very concerning over the longer term if the interest rate will rise. At this point, if you look at for example, government bond yields, it's for 10-year government bond yield stands at 4.2%, around 4.3%. It's not so concerning, but if it rises, if we see that, for example, uncertainty will accelerate, and this will be translated into the higher bond yields, and if it exceeds some sort of 5%, it generates a lot of pressures and risks for fiscal sustainability. And I'm using this as an argument that yes, the KSA type of consideration of US economy is more relevant from my perspectives. And also, as other people always referring to this fact that we don't know who will be elected in the United States, but both candidates are also communicating that we will have this expansionary policy, right? And no one is in the near term, no one is really planning to just shrink their spending because of many issues, and it creates pressures from my perspectives.
Can I ask something? If these fears materialize and you do observe increases in the term premium towards the long end, what other effects would this have apart from the fiscal sustainability, which is obvious, an obvious danger? Would there be spillovers elsewhere in the financial system that
for
we should be
sure,
concerned
for
about?
sure, we will. Yeah, for sure, we will have these financial system risks as well. One of the risks will be that it will have two types of considerations. Firstly, the net profit margin will increase because of the banks, but at the same time, what we will see is that their capital losses will increase because they hold these fixed rate investments, right? I mean, these government bond deals and so on. And also this will be translated, right? This
We
interest
saw
rate.
this, in fact, with some banks when we started tightening a few years ago.
Yes. And also these capital losses will be there definitely, although the kind of the cost of funding, right, the deposit rates will increase. And all of this, of course, will have spillover over the financial system, and it will be translated into the higher risks, increased risks, and we may still face because of this, if this risk materializes, maybe hard landing scenarios will be on the plate. I believe this. As Governor mentioned that this bank lending tightening, we see here that bank lendings are tightening, and it's more in line with this case B type of consideration, and maybe we can say that it will somehow help this consumption to restrain. However, I have linked here these two indicators. Moody's BAA spread and this bank lending tightening. Firstly, why I look at the BAA spread? I'm looking BAA spread because I don't see, based on this indicator, any signs of upcoming moderation. Because during the recessions, we see that they just increase, and here we have this at one of the historical low level. But it can significantly increase. For example, during the taper tantrum, once Fed just announced in May of 2013 that they were starting this. They were stopping this purchasing quantitative easing program. We saw that BAA spread increased massively, even in a very short period of time. Maybe we can see this, but at this point, we see that this remains low. And if this remains low, this is an indication that maybe, soft landing scenario is on the plate, and we will not see too much drop in real economic activity. However, we see that this bank lending tightening index is also increasing. By the way, I would say that once we see that this BAA spread increases, it also affects this credit worthiness, meaning that there is investors and people just sentiments are deteriorating, and once sentiments are deteriorating, all systems become more risk averse, and this risk aversion is visible in the financial system as well. We may see this tightening standards much more over the time. But at this point, why I'm using this?
They're not unusually tight, right? I mean, there was some accommodation during COVID, obviously, where these were relaxed, but to me, at least, they don't seem as historically particularly tight, right? They're pretty normal at this point.
Exactly. This is the point, that remains slightly restrictive, not too much. If we see over the crisis periods, it's not too much. So I think that we can use this in terms of both case A, case B arguments. It could be used in both ways. And that's a fancy way of using this F plus Mark II, because we have data that we are using in both terms. And just to wrap up and not to exceed our time, labor market that we have to talk about, I would say that labor market shows us exactly the same direction, that yes, it eases gradually, but still we see some signs of demand pull inflation. How? For example, if you look at the average hourly earning, its growth rate, it's higher than what it would be the wage growth rate, consistent with 2% target. I mean, this nominal GDP growth, for example. We know that if we have this 1.8% of based on the Fed's projection, I'm using here 1.8% of long-term growth and 2% inflation, it's somewhere 3.8%. So nominal GDP in the growth would be in the longer term.
Unless you are underestimating productivity, which has happened
for sure.
before.
This is very good comment, because I believe that if there is like productivity rise, which will generate higher longer term growth, this means that maybe this line is slightly above and the labor market is showing us some moderation, and yes, it can be used for case B type of consideration. Let me just summarize these inflationary risks and disinflationary risks into this table. And let me tell you how I would communicate based on this, what I would suggest and how I would communicate this decision. Well, you see that mostly I've said that this is a strong service consumption. We see these underlying inflation measures to be elevated. I see some fiscal sector concerns. I see some political uncertainty. I have not shown you these commodity prices, but it's also very uncertain what will happen there. Depends on the China as well. What kind of outlook will we have there? If Chinese economy will just go down, this may mean that we will have a lower demand from China, and then this could be shrinking the commodity prices. But if this not materializes, and if there will be some sort of production cut in terms of oil, for example, from OPEC plus countries, yes, commodity prices may be even further rising because US production is slightly constrained. This is case A type of considerations. At the same time, we have this case B type of considerations. As you said, and I also mentioned this, that this productivity rises, this AI spending, which is really increased. If you look at the real GDP growth, we see that it's also driven apart from this consumption and government spending due to the increase in business inventories. And these business inventories, is one of them is like non-residential inventories. And here we see that maybe we see more investments in terms of AI developments, which is in line with higher productivity and just is not accelerating inflation, right? So this type of consideration is more case B. Also, flexible prices remain low. Financial condition gradually becomes restrictive. Labor market, what I've said and what we've seen, could be more in line with case B. And global economy. If China is a key concern. If China will continue to just...
So in the interest of time, Mariam, how do we communicate this, all these?
So balancing up these risks and taking into account all sorts of policy scenarios that would lead to, that may create some sort of risks for policymakers, I would suggest that balancing based on these risks, the relevant decision would be maintaining now the policy rate unchanged at 5.5% and communicating sort of risks to the public and indicating that given the realization of these scenarios, under, for example, case A, the policy rate would be tighter, and under these inflationary risks, and soft landing scenario realization, we would follow the forward guidance that's been done in the previous months as well, that we will start declining the rate in September, and this will be a continuous process. And maybe if I have 1 minute, I would like here to show you this type of, which is very important for policymakers' perspective to avoid these dark corners. This is a least regret approach. What if policy error scenarios will materialize? And here I have this impact on inflation under each policy scenarios. And you see that if it gets red, it's high. It has high impact on inflation, and if it's up, it has upward.
The lighter it is, the better.
Yeah. So if we follow B scenario and there happens A, we may just ultimately be into X. This is the worst scenario for the policymaker.
Right.
And under such case, I believe that given this sort of consideration and risks, it's better to keep now the cautious stance and to keep rate unchanged.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam.
Thank you very much, Mariam. It was a
very useful as always.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So, Yanis, let me know when you are ready, and we will start with Anna, because Georgi is unfortunately unable to
Georgi is
join
not
us.
okay.
Therefore, we'll start with Anna, and then it will be our last presentation before lunch. So, okay, let me start. Anna, are you here?
Maybe Anna is not here because she knew that the presentation would be in half an hour.
Oh, no, no, no.
Oh.
She asked me explicitly to move her presentation to 12. Therefore, if you can possibly contact her, so we know that. Okay. She's writing that she's joining us. Therefore, we'll be starting soon. I know that Anna has some technical issues. I will ask her whether how long will it take? Let's see.
Yeah, Alex, I'll also be right back in a second.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Hello, Anna. Is everything all right?
Yes, my
that
computer.
yeah. No worries.
Okay.
It always happening. We can just wait 1 minute for Yanis, and then we'll start.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, ready.
Alex, sorry, needed some caffeine here.
That's absolutely understandable. Okay, so let's start our last presentation before lunchtime. So let me quickly introduce our governor, our mock governor today. So welcome Ioannis Halikas, who has 30 years of experience at the International Monetary Fund. He's also obtained a PhD in economics at Yale University under James Tobin, and he is a senior advisor at the Better Policy Project. So, welcome, our governor. And do you have anything to add first?
Now, looking forward to Anna's analysis and policy recommendations to help us in these big puzzling circumstances. We've seen, of course, inflation coming down, but I'm mostly concerned about this, not concerned, but puzzled about this resilience in the real economy. We have very strong GDP growth, stronger than we were expecting a few months ago. Unemployment is close to its narrow still, despite our tightening. Uh, so how are we going to read this? Is it the supply side behaving better than we expected, or could we have demand supported by possible bubbles, which have been a big headache, as you know, for policymakers in the past? So I would very much like your analysis and your policy suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much. Mr. Government, let me just quickly introduce you, Anna, as our presenter. So Anna is a student at the Global Forecasting School and also a macroeconomist at the National Bank of Georgia. So please welcome.
Hello, thank you, Alex, for the introduction. Exactly, I'm a student at the GFS and I work at the NBG. So today I will be doing case scenarios for the US economy under FPAS Mark II framework. So we know that FPAS Mark II framework is a new generation of FPAS framework for forecasting and policy analysis, which is basically like a system which helps policymakers to carry out policy analysis. And today, this FPAS Mark II framework as a system will help me as a policymaker to carry out this analysis in a structured way. So I will be structuring market reference and then basing case A and case B on that. And the FPAS Mark II framework incorporates all these newest challenges that policymakers are currently facing, and it takes into account this highly elevated uncertain environment and the non-linear linkages. I will be discussing about that later. So FPAS central banks organize their policy making into these three essential questions such as where is the economy now? This means current trends in the economy analysis. What are the underlying forces? What are the driving forces behind the current trends? And we must also mention, we mentioned many times, but still that these two questions are tightly interlinked. Why? Because it doesn't make sense to do the current analysis without like knowing what are the factors that drive these current trends, right? So, and lastly, and most importantly, third question we need to answer is that most important ingredient is that how these policy instruments need to be adjusted to anchor the economy, and that's what we will be doing later. So effectively, FPAS Mark II framework in a nutshell is that it is like a prudent risk management approach to monetary policy that aims to introduce risk management principles into monetary policy making. Due to this highly uncertain environment, we need these risk management principles. And the advantage of employing this FPAS Mark II framework is that for policy maker is that it addresses these uncertainties and aims to change the communication as well as this policy making process. So therefore, it will make this process more effective, especially in times of this high uncertainty like COVID-19 we saw, and also period afterwards, right? We are seeing this highly elevated uncertainty after pandemic, right? And regarding this theoretical or non-theoretical or technical framework under FPAS Mark II, we must recognize that the world is more complex than this sort of linear simplification used in the previous iterations of FPAS frameworks. And we introduced these non-linearities, namely such as convex Phillips curve, loss function approach instead of using reaction function, and also endogenous credibility. The fact that central bank only can build credibility gradually, and the pace of inflation anchoring depends on credibility. So under the FPAS Mark II framework, we think about credibility as like a stock that is accumulated. So under Mark II, market reference and what market thinks generally is crucial. After this reference rate, to construct the market scenarios, to construct the scenarios around it, it's crucial. And we base our case A and case B scenarios on this market reference point. And as the creator of a FPAS Mark II framework, Doug Luxton, suggested, we present, and today I will be presenting illustrative scenarios based forward guidance. So today I will have two major illustrative scenarios. So under FPAS Mark II, we have case A and case B scenarios, alongside with some taxonomy of shocks like case X and case Y, and getting into these trapped corners are highly elevated, and all of you know that this trapped in the dark corners is the term Blanchard used, and it's very relative for today's economy. And alongside this case X and Y, as mentioned, I will have case A and case B. Just to briefly sum up, case A highlights the situation when there are like excess demand and price pressures requiring higher policy path from the central bank than it is currently priced in the market. While in case B scenario, it's vice versa. So I would like to also briefly mention what are the case A and case AB and case BAs as well, because some central banks, for example, like National Bank of Georgia, also use these risk scenarios like case AB or case BA, and analyze these scenarios, what is the associated cost from this materialization. And this type of scenarios are important in terms of policy of least regret. Therefore, it's crucial, and I would say extremely crucial, to understand this case AB as well and case BA. So, for example, what is case AB? This AB caption situation when the central bank finds out that we are in the case B world, but policy follows case A type considerations. That means that regardless of the fact that we could face some downwards demand pressures and disinflationary risks, we still follow the tight monetary policy, and that could very well result in further deeper slowdown in output. And similarly, what is case BA is that in case BA, we face the situation when the inflation is high, but the policy rate path follows by the central bank follows sort of case B. Case B sort of
policy
response. Yes, policy. Yes, exactly. And we say under these two cases, to be honest, that case BA is sort of more costly. Now, why? Because under case BA, you sort of have impact on the inflation expectations. So we know that expectations diminish from the market, and this leads us to significant economic loss. And for instance, let's do this case BA analysis, for example, for the US as an illustrative example. So for the US, if the Federal Reserve underestimates this persistent inflation, narrow pressures, and keeps this policy path for too low for too long, like following B path, it may fail to convince markets that there is Fed is committed to control the inflation, and this can cause inflation expectations to become unanchored, leading to this sort of self-reinforcing cycle for inflation, rising prices, and wages. As a result, Fed's credibility is lost, and as I mentioned in the beginning, credibility is something like a stock and it needs to be accumulated. So Fed will need some time to regain this trust of the economic actors, and without credibility, attempts to manage any sort of inflation are less effective. So therefore, Fed needs to implement more sort of hawkish scenario in the end, and potentially also some disruptive measures for the economy, since it will need more aggressive policy.
Yeah. No, this has been very clear, Anna. If you could tell us now how your analysis relates to the current situation. Where are we now in terms of risks, in terms of and your assessment of how should you be responding to these risks? For what's in
Yes.
your analysis is the more relevant consideration at this point?
Yes. Okay, so yes, exactly. So we know case BA is costly and case BAX is, to be honest, even worse. So let's move on to the current US analysis. If we look at the economic activity, we clearly see that economy appears still to be solid. And based on these updated projections by Atlanta Fed, that was in 24th July, if I'm not mistaken, GDP now currently is at 2.8%, and we should expect that this solid economic activity will still remain there, and this is about this 2.8% is well above than the CBO estimate of potential growth, which stands at 1.8%. I don't want to say that this CBO estimate is like a perfect measure, but at least it helps us to analyze whether this GDP now estimate will be towards like inflationary force or not. And let's sum up why is this economic activity so strong in the US, and what drives this economic activity to be so solid. We need to analyze this after pandemic sort of story overall. And if we look into the dynamics of real personal consumption expenditure, we see that after 2021, people just started spending their money, and consumption remains very solid due to various reasons, like such as huge pent-up demand, huge fiscal stimulus that we saw during pandemic, also due to monetary easing that was in 2021, and etc. So this strong consumption story, we all know, is something still there. And if we want to think about the recession, thinking about recession is unimaginable without drop in consumption. And as I described, consumption remains very strong, and especially service consumption remains pretty strong. So if we look at the decomposition of for the US,
Can
the
I ask you?
CPI, we see
Can I ask you about? Sorry, can I ask you about consumption for a moment? Because as you say, yeah, it's the big, by far the largest chunk of GDP. How do you interpret this persistently strong consumption and fall in the saving rate? Is it just that people are consuming the accumulated precautionary savings during the COVID period, so they are now uh, uh, running them down, uh, or at the same time, is it the fact that the overall savings as a stock of the economy has in fact increased, right? Because you have this increase in asset holdings, in the value of asset holdings of households. And how much longer can we count on this? Is there a risk of a bubble there that we may see an abrupt correction, which we should be doing our best to avoid, of course?
Yes, I will say, to be honest, that this like consumption story still remains there, because this accumulated household financial as well as non-financial wealth is still at high levels. And under case A scenario, which I believe is, to be honest, more possible scenario, this we will not see any like major correction in household. Maybe we can think that this neutral rate remains still remains well above in its force, and if we also compare this price to income and rent to income ratios, currently they are at historical figures, historically high levels, right? And personally, I don't believe there will be some major drop in asset prices, in real estate prices. There we could see some moderation. I will not say no, but I still see KSA scenario, to be honest, realizing more.
Sorry to interrupt, Anna. I'm not sure whether this is your intention or not, but we still see the first slide of your presentation. Are we there? Is it supposed to be, or otherwise maybe you can change it?
No, yes. I currently am changing. It's not changing.
At least it's not changing for me. I don't know about others, but
For Ioannis, was it changing?
No, it was a nice outside view of the Fed.
Oh no! So this whole time the slides were not changing.
No,
yeah, they
I've seen
weren't
this
changing. Yeah, I mean,
Like it was not changing like this,
no,
right?
no.
Oh
I
my
mean, now we
God.
can't see your screen at all, so.
Um,
I mean, it's not a big like
It's not a big
we
deal
are able.
because
It's not a
actually
big deal. We can able to
it's
follow
it's
you, so don't
interesting
worry
to
about
hear
that
you
too
go
much.
over you're explaining it very well. So I
Yes,
think
yes.
oh no. So it was not changing.
okay, now
Like
it is. Now
Yeah,
it's
now it
changed.
is. Now it is.
wow. Okay, I was like on this slide then this. Okay.
Yeah, now we're
So
talking, yeah, exactly.
I will keep and I will not take much longer. So I wanted to also provide the CPI decomposition because, as I said, this consumption remains strong, especially service consumption. And we see the
Yeah.
service-less energy services as well as food away from home. We know mostly our restaurants, cafe bars remain still elevated, and this consumption remaining elevated is exactly this GDP now estimate, which is at 2.8%. We still see is well above this CBO estimate of 1.8%. And not only in the US, but we analyze many other countries, and the story is, to be honest, sort of similar, that this neutral rate could be higher, and this service consumption in many countries, to be honest, also remains strong. And the reason behind this could be that these pandemic-related restrictions, we know like there were a lot of restrictions, and during pandemic people have accumulated savings, this sort of precautionary savings, and they sort of followed revenge spending after the restrictions eased, and that is why may we see this service consumption being so strong in the US and as well. So in the story, why this consumption is so strong, the story begins, we know, with the household balance sheet. If we look at the details of the US household balance sheet, we see that during pandemic, there was like massive accumulation in the wealth in the US households, especially if we compare this end of 2023 to beginning of 2021, US household net wealth increased by like stock prices increased massively by 116%, and overall increase was 50 trillion, around $50 trillion, which, if we just want to put this number into perspective, GDP for the US in 2019 compared to this 50 trillion is like double the size of GDP. And under this, we mean stock market for financial wealth, and for non-financial will mean real estate, which also is like highly elevated, we know. And as I mentioned before, I don't really expect any moderation, to be honest. I don't think there will be any big moderation. However, I have that for
So
case-wise
does
scenario
this
as well.
mean that it reflects in your view, it reflects, I mean, this increase in asset prices, for example, reflect to a large extent supply improvements that we may not yet have captured, so they are more durable and more in line with fundamentals?
Yes, to be honest, this supply side is sending a sort of mixed signal. So, key question like this financial market is sort of also very interesting. I'm sort of like jumping in between, to be honest. I did not plan this to go as this, but financial market conditions are currently pretty restrictive, and meaning that this moderates these demand side pressures. So maybe we will see some moderation, and based on this BLT index, which recently started to raise again a little bit, if we look into the decomposition, we see financial conditions that are pretty tight. And in case of, for example, business and consumer loans, which result in the moderation of consumer and real estate loans like mortgages, helping this moderating case A scenario. So that's why we are saying this to the case B. And we see some downwards dynamics in case of loans. We see on the left-hand side of the graph here. And to be honest, like if it continues this way, it will somehow ease these demand side pressures, and this analysis more or less fits into our case B. However,
Yeah, although you may want to consider here that, as you know, in the U.S., at least on the enterprise sector, right? Bank financing is not the main part of their financing, so it's conceivable,
yes,
and maybe you can look into that. It's conceivable that they are substituting bank financing for bond financing or stock market financing, which we know have improved
yes.
since the pandemic, certainly. Yeah.
Yes, I do actually agree on that comment. I remember you making that comment previously, and I completely agree that like if the rates are maybe high for BLT, like we should also see some like bond stock market, because that could be some sort of substitute for this bank loan. So I will do that for sure. Like I talked about demand side pressures, but the supply side is also very interesting, because I think that the supply side is like sort of sending some mixed signals, right? So if we look at the beverage curve on the right hand side, which shows the relationship between vacancy rate and unemployment rate in the US, we see that it started to like decelerate, and it currently is at pre-pandemic level, which is like more or less good for case B scenario. And this tightness at the labor market more or less is. However, at the same time, if we look at the wage dynamics, average hourly earnings, we see that this still exceeds this sort of CPI inflation, and we still see some wage price spiral risks there. Like it's still quite high. So this is sort of like mixed signals. This is supportive of case A scenario, while this is for case B. And I would like to very briefly discuss about sticky price inflation as well, because under a past Mark II framework, we know that, and also for the Fed, while it targets PCE of 2%, it also uses sticky price inflation for analyzing these underlying forces behind price dynamics. And if we look at this graph, we see this 3-month over 3-month sticky price inflation decreasing quite well at 3.2%, but still remaining above this 2% PCE target, for example, and year-over-year sticky price inflation is also high. And like I showed here, this service consumption remaining elevated. We know that this sticky price inflation is like very it sort of incorporate inflation expectations. Therefore, these prices are sort of already like expectations are already priced into these sticky prices, and that is why we like this measure to use. And also, like here we saw services remaining upwards. And sometimes we also say, to be honest, that this sticky price inflation is like a well proxy for wages, because wages are typically set for 1 year and it needs to incorporate these inflation expectations. So wages are also very good proxy for this sticky price inflation, we also say, to be honest. So overall, this market reference, I want to say just like a couple of words about this as well. Like market references mentioned and what market thinks under FPAS framework is very important and crucial. So if we look at this probability tracker by Atlanta Fed, we clearly see that market participants has revised downwards their expectations in this month, and they are like sort of look like have a more positive outlook for the economy, and are maybe expecting first rate cut in September. Who knows? But to be honest, to briefly sum up these case A and case B scenarios, given that there are still demand side pressures, we think that this strong demand may persist, and I think it will persist, and this strong demand will be exactly fueled by this solid household balance sheet, which is still at high level. And as I said, this rent to income as well as like price to income ratios are at its historical levels. And if we don't see a moderation in these asset prices, which can be validated by this higher neutral rate currently, we may still stick to this case A scenario, because these high asset prices, we know, may not directly impact, but this sort of creates buffer for households to feel confident to keep spending. And as mentioned, wage growth dynamics is still leads us to think that labor market may still remain tight. So under case A, Fed funds rate will increase slightly, or to be honest, I just believe that it stays at the current level for a longer period, and a strong economic activity remains longer. It may turn into the higher real rates, because investors will demand like higher returns for the longer term, and will demand these higher returns, meaning that this could be translated into increased premiums as well. And also, to be honest, talking about these increased premiums, I have to mention here during my last 2 minutes that if we look at the fiscal we also observe some fiscal dominance from the fiscal side, and I believe this fiscal spending is maybe too high, and questioning this sort of fiscal sustainability, and this fiscal side could be too loose. And also we know that this Naira rate is at between 4 to 4.5, and current unemployment rate being at 4.5 is very close to the Naira rate. So this fiscal dominance, especially given the fact that we are at full employment, is sort of dangerous. So that's why I mentioned this term premium as well. And lastly, very last case B scenario I want to mention, under these tight financial conditions, maybe banks' appetite for risk are like sort of not the same, and due to this tight BLT index and tight financial conditions, we are seeing like several loan rates increasing, like consumer and business loans, and therefore these loans are decreasing, and maybe this tightening will have some result, but with a lag, and this will lower loans will be ultimately translated into lower consumption maybe, and labor market slightly indicates that maybe we will see some moderation from supply side pressures. But to be honest, in the end, I'm more over towards case A scenario rather than case B. And here I cannot just not mention that case Y scenario as well, that like we know that this uncertainty is very much around, and we need to take into account that there are some shocks that may hit us and lead us in very tail risks like case Y. And in case Y, what we can be observing is that very like cooling down of the economy, and we may see some big corrections in the stock market, like huge corrections. For example, like we could see moderation of 30% in stock market, and this could be translated into lower consumption, and this will require much more dovish policy rate path by the Fed than currently anticipated. But again and again, because we don't see any moderation on the real estate and also overall financial as well as non-financial side, that is exactly why I believe case A is more probable. Thank you.
Right. No, thanks. Yeah, no, I think your policy recommendation is consistent with the way you have weighed the various risks and the way you read the asset price developments is more likely to be persistent rather than reversed. It may be a bit tricky to communicate this, to remain tight as inflation is coming down. How would
Yes,
you
yes.
how would you communicate this decision to remain relatively tight, even though at least the inflation numbers that most people are observing seem to be performing well and to be going rapidly towards the our medium-term target?
Yes, yes. I mean, sticky prices, especially this 3 month over 3 months, is quite very much decreasing, and this could be translated and transition
But
towards a year
frankly,
rate.
the public doesn't even look at sticky price
Yes, but
inflation.
yes,
They
yes,
look
exactly.
at either the
Yeah.
headline or
How I
the core inflation, which is our target. So they might be a
yes,
bit.
yes.
So, I mean, how would you
Mhm.
suggest, because you make this risk risk type analysis, is there some concrete way that we could
Yes.
convincingly convey this to the public?
I do agree that currently, like due to these elections being right on the edge, and it's difficult to communicate that Fed may should like tighten its policy high than currently. So I agree that due to these elections, Fed should not sort of show some biasness towards any of the parties. So it will be hard for them to raise the interest.
No, no,
Therefore,
but
maybe.
even if we abstract from the elections, if we were to make a purely economics based case, how would we make it in a convincing way? I mean, yeah, suppose elections, usually we don't want to get involved with these things and we will
Yes.
avoid anything.
I think I understand the question correctly. So I think I would say that Fed should just maintain its current stance rather than increase the rate. I would say maintain the current stance because we are having some uncertain messages, and until we know towards which direction these messages are exactly, we need to maintain this current stance. So, for example, we are having some uncertain messages from the labor market, so we should say that let's just maintain this current stance. Let's see whether this average earnings will decrease or increase, and then we can make a decision that will not harm the economy.
So you think you should, I mean, your preferred stance would be
Maintain the policy rate. Yes,
to
yes, yes.
essentially not to just convey to the market that contrary
To
to market
maintain.
expectations, maybe we should not be easing in September. Is this how I understand your?
Yes, yes. Yes,
Okay,
yes. I would say that one should maintain the policy rate.
great. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Anna. No, this was very useful.
Thank you. Thanks all for watching.
Thank you very much. So this was our last session before our well-deserved lunch. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Yanis. Thank you to all the presenters. We'll see each other back at 2 p.m. Yerevan time, which is in 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm not sure, Asya, whether we are live streaming during that break, or maybe we should restart our live stream back at 2. I'm not sure what's better. If Asya, you're here, then you can tell us. Otherwise, we can just stay here, mute ourselves, and go for lunch. Okay, then I think this will be the best solution. So we'll see each other in the same room at 2 p.m. or slightly before 2 p.m. to prepare everything. And thank you very much to our mock governor as well as to the presenters. It was great to listen to all of them.
Thanks, Alex. See you later.